Hi, I'm Scott Bradford from the Rio Grande Jewelry Tech Team, and this is the Fuser500 casting system available at Rio Grande. This compact casting and molding system offers professional level features with a small scale footprint. We're going to be taking you through the entire process of setup, and how all these machines work together, and we're also going to be going through the molding and casting process using this kit. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our vacuum and we're going to connect it to our vacuum mixer. So you should have a power cord for the vacuum, a power cord for the mixer, and this tubing with this inline filter on it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this vacuum and we're going to plug the power cord into the back and plug the other side into the mixer. So now that we have the vacuum connected to the mixer, we're going to plug the mixer into the wall, inserting the power cord in the back here, and then plugging this into the wall. The last thing we need to do for the mixer and the vacuum is we need to install the vacuum tubing. This inline filter is going to keep any investment from getting into your vacuum pump. Now the end that's closest to the inline filter is the one we want to install on the vacuum pump itself. Directly on the vacuum pump by just pressing that tubing on. And now we're going to go ahead and turn on the vacuum pump. By switching on the vacuum pump at the pump itself, because we have it connected directly to the mixer, we can now control the vacuum directly from the mixer itself rather than from the vacuum pump. Okay, so next I'm going to show you how to install the temperature controller onto the kiln and get that all set up. So the first thing we're going to install is the thermocouple. So we're going to need that, and we're also going to need the Allen key that is included in your accessory kit. First thing we need to do is we need to loosen this set screw on the side of the kiln using our Allen key. So I'm going to give that a few turns. But we don't need to back it out all the way. So next I'm going to take this metal end of the thermocouple and I'm going to insert it into the hole. But I'm going to open the kiln while I'm doing this because I want it inserted about 1/2 inch or so where it's in the kiln, but it's not impeding on my ability to add flasks. And once I get the depth just right, I'm going to take my Allen key and I'm going to tighten down this set screw so the thermocouple doesn't move. We're going to take the plug of the thermocouple and we're going to plug it into the side of our temperature controller right here. Next we're going to take the power cord from the kiln and we're going to plug it directly into the temperature controller. The plug is on the same side as the thermocouple. And then we want to make sure that the power switch on the kiln itself is in the on position. So the last thing we need to do is we need to plug the temperature controller directly into the wall. So we're going to take our power cord, plug it into the back side here, and make sure that I have it turned the right way. And then I can plug this into the wall. So next we're going to be setting up our wax injector and our air pump. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and get our wax loaded into this machine. So the way you do that is you unscrew these 4 screws up here at the top, and then we're going to remove the lid and a gasket underneath to get to the chamber where the injection wax is. So your injection wax will go in here, and it only has to be filled about halfway to 3/4 with the injection wax of your choice. And then we can start reassembling the gasket and the lid. And then replacing all 4 thumb screws. So next we're going to install the air pump to the wax injector. So we're going to locate the end of the tube at the end of the air pump, and we're going to press it onto this barbed fitting on the back of the wax injector. Now this may require a bit of force, but try to get it as far as you can on that barbed fitting. Now the last thing we need to do to set up this wax injector is we need to plug in the power cord here in the back. And now we can plug this into the wall. So now that we have everything set up, let's go through the entire process of making a mold and casting a flask using this kit. So now we're going to prepare our flask. So I'm going to need a few things from the kit. First, I'm going to need this plate here that has the two nuts on either side and the hole in the middle. As you can see on mine, I've already filled mine with some sticky wax because this is where we're going to be attaching the main sprue for our pieces. So I have this plate, I've got a couple of wax to cast, I've got my sticky wax, and I've also got some sprue wax. So the next step would be to attach the sprue and go ahead and add our pieces to the tree. So now that I got my pieces sprued, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my flask over the top and kind of center this the best I can. Doesn't have to be perfect. Next we're going to install this ring up on top. Now you'll notice that there's two holes on either side. So we want to put that on top of the flask and line the holes up with the nuts underneath as best we can. And then we're going to grab these out of your accessory kit. These are long threaded rods. And we're going to put them through the holes on the top and then screw them into the bottom, and do that on both sides. This is where I can't see. And once I have both of those screwed into the base, now I can tighten these up here to cinch this down to the flask. You don't need to take a wrench to it, just finger tight. So next part, we're going to grab this cylinder here that's actually going to go over the flask. And this connector is for the vacuum. We want to make sure that this is down by the base when we install it. And last piece is a rubber funnel, and that is going to go on the top of our flask. You can see there's two cutouts on either side corresponding to our two threaded rods. So I will just install these in here and push it down as best I can. And there we go. So next thing I need to do is I need to install the mixer blade onto our main lids here. So on the bottom is a set screw, so I want to take out the set screw. Insert the mixer blade and line up the holes, and then put the set screw back in without dropping it. Now before we invest, let's take a look and see how all these pieces are going to fit together when we start to invest. So our investment and our water will be going in here, and then this lid will be installed on top with the mixer blade inside. The flask assembly will actually be mounted upside down on top of this side over here. And once we get that together, now we can connect all of our hoses. So this piece of tubing comes in your accessory kit, and that is going to go from this spot here on the investment side over here to this side. And then the tubing directly from our vacuum is going to be installed right here on the right side. So as we start to pull vacuum, we're going to be pulling vacuum in this chamber as we're mixing, but through this tube, we're also pulling vacuum in here to keep it under vacuum while we're pouring. So once we have everything assembled, just like this, we will go ahead and turn on the vacuum, which is going to make sure that all of these pieces stay together. And then we're going to load it into our mixer. So in the mixer, there's a little sleeve here that slides up, and it will key down to fit on top of our lid here. And then we will start the mixer, and we will mix for about 60 seconds. Once we're done mixing, we'll turn off the mixer. We're going to lift this up and slide this whole assembly out. And then we're going to pick it up by hand, leaving the vacuum on, and we're going to turn it counterclockwise. As you can see, if I remove this part, you can see there's a hole right here in the lid. That's where the investment is going to pour from the mixing chamber to our flash chamber. So while everything is still under vacuum, we're going to turn it 90 degrees to pour the investment. And then when we're done, we're going to turn off the vacuum. We're going to remove our assembly here, unplug all of our tubing, and then we're going to set this aside to set up for at least an hour to an hour and a half, depending on your flask size. So now our flask has had plenty of time to set up. So now we're going to take apart the flask assembly. So I'm going to start by removing the outer chamber, remove our funnel, and then loosen up these screws and completely unscrew the flask assembly. So on the bottom, I'll pull this apart. Now here, in order to have a larger pour hole, I need to actually cut a funnel on that flask with an X-Acto knife. Okay, so now that we have our funnel cut, now we're going to load it into the kiln. So I'm going to open up the lid. And when we load this into the kiln, we want to make sure that this side, where the wax is going to drain out, is facing up. We don't want to face this down like we normally would. We actually want to face this up. So taking the included tongs and just lower it down into the kiln. And during burnout, this refractory material will actually absorb the smoke from the burnout. So make sure that once you start the burnout, you leave this lid closed until the burnout is complete. Do not open it. Now we're going to program our controller. So everything is plugged up. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the controller. Now, your burnout will vary depending on the investment that you're using. So make sure to check your manufacturer's recommendations on the burnout that they recommend. But to program temperatures into this, I'm going to hit the P button, and then I'm going to bring this up to 150. This is currently in Celsius. So I'm going to bring this up to 150, which is about around 300 degrees. And then I'm going to hit the P button again. So you can see the temperature is already raising. So now we have started the burnout. So one thing I want to mention is that with this controller, this will set and hold a set temp. So I've currently set this to 150 degrees. So it will stay there as long as I tell it to. So if I need to hold this temperature for, say, 2 hours, once it reaches 150, I'll come back to the controller, I'll turn the temperature up to the next step of the burnout, and then continue from there. Okay, so now we have our flask burned out, and currently it is holding at about 1,000 degrees where we're going to be casting. So before we start casting, I want to talk about the casting table that comes in your kit. So it's very simple. It comes with a plate that sits up on top, and the orifice for the vacuum tubing is over here on the side. So when we want to pull vacuum on this machine, we can just plug in the tubing, start the vacuum, and then once we set our flask up on top, we will have the vacuum we need for casting. Now, before we start, in your kit are these paper gaskets. Now, how these are designed to be used is they are there to help create a seal for your flask. We can't just set a flask down on top of this because it's metal. We're not going to be able to pull a vacuum on that. But with these are designed to actually be saturated with a liquid or an oil so that when you set this down and then put your flask on top, you'll get a good seal for casting. However, we actually recommend using one of these. This is a silicone casting pad, and they're typically seen on larger casting machines, but these are great for creating a quick seal. All I have to do is just set this up on top of the casting table, and as soon as I set my flask on top and start the vacuum, I'll instantly have a vacuum for my flask, which is exactly what I need. And then once I'm done casting and I've poured the metal to release the vacuum, I simply just remove this tubing, turn off the vacuum, and we're done. Okay, so we're about ready to cast. So things are going to go pretty fast here. So let's actually go over the process real quick just to see what's going to happen. So we have our kiln at temp. So I'm going to use the tongs that were supplied with your kit to remove the flask, set it onto the vacuum table, and then I'm going to turn on the vacuum to go ahead and get that going. I will get the metal melted, go ahead and pour it into the flask, and then I'm going to give it probably around 30 to 60 seconds to sit under vacuum before I release the vacuum by removing the tubing and then turning off the vacuum and then moving my flask aside to allow it to cool a little bit before I quench. Okay, so now we're going to be making an RTV mold using this kit. Now, we're going to need a few things here. In your kit, in your accessory kit, you'll have mold frames of a few different sizes, these kind of sprue and rod formers here, these glass plates, which will go on either side of the mold, and also some rubber bands so we can hold everything together. So the first thing I need to do is I need to attach this sprue and rod former. So the way you do that is you can use something like super glue, but today I'm going to be using just a bit of sticky wax. So I'll hold this down to the mold frame with the sticky wax, and then I'm going to attach the piece we're going to be molding to this using the same sticky wax. So now we've got our piece in our mold frame. So now let's take a look and see how the mixing is going to take place and how all these things kind of fit together. So in your kit, you have this glass here. This is specifically for mixing your RTV. So the first thing we need to do is we need to take the lid and we need to install the smaller mixer blade for the RTV. So to do that, I'm going to release this set screw and I'm going to install the blade, making sure that the holes line up, and then reinstall that set screw. Okay, so now that the mixer blade is installed, the way this is going to go together is on the interior here, you also have a rubber gasket, and that is designed to fit right on top of this cup to pull vacuum inside the cup. Now our tube directly from our vacuum is going to get pushed onto the side here. Now, we don't need to pressurize another chamber like we did with investing. So in your accessory kit is this little piece of tubing with a metal cap on it. And we're just going to push that down on the top just like so. And now we can add our RTV mixed to the manufacturer's specifications to this cup, and then we can proceed with our vacuum mixing. Okay, so now we have our part A and part B, both in this cup. We have our mixer blade installed. We have the vacuum connected to the side, and then our cap up on top here. So I'm going to place the lid on top, and I'm going to start the vacuum, and I'm going to mix for about 30 seconds. So now that it's mixed, I can go ahead and release the vacuum. Remove the lid. And I can pour this into the mold frame. So now you can see we've poured our RTV into the mold, and because we mixed it under vacuum, you can see there's very few air bubbles left in the RTV, and any that are left in there will most likely float to the top within the hour. So now we're going to set this aside and let it set up. Okay, now that the mold is cured, I'm going to remove all the rubber bands and take apart this mold. So in your kit is an X-Acto knife. You can also use a scalpel for cutting open these molds. Next, I'm going to score it just a little bit all the way around the mold. Now in your kit is this mold cutting device. So this is very similar to the kind of can opener style mold cutting tools. So I can fit it in there like that and start actually cutting the mold. Okay, so now let's talk about the wax injector. So we've already set it up. We've opened up the lid, we've added our injection wax, and now we need to flip it on and bring it up to temperature. So the programming this controller here is exactly the same as the Kiln controller. This one is currently set to Fahrenheit. So we have set our temperature to the temperature that the manufacturer of the injection wax recommends. And normally it'll take several hours, especially if you filled it up a little higher. It'll take it probably 3 to 5 hours before all of that wax fully melts and is ready for injection. So ours is now up to temp, and now we need to add pressure to the system. So the way we do that is up here is the regulator for your pressure. So to use this, you pull to unlock, turn it to the pressure you want, and then push it back in to lock that pressure in place. So to start, I'm going to leave this pulled out, and then I'm going to start pumping the hand pump. And that's good. I'm at about 10 psi right now. Generally with wax injection, you want to inject anywhere from 8 to 12 psi. So now I can go to my regulator and I can adjust it up or down as needed. So if I need it to go down, turn it counterclockwise, and if I need the pressure to go up, turn it clockwise, and then push it in to lock that pressure in place. So now that we've got our pressure and our temperature right where it needs to be, I'm going to use the glass plates from the molding side of the kit to compress my mold together and then press against the nipple on the front of the unit to actually inject the wax. So one feature about this Fuser wax injector is it offers the ability to do vacuum wax injecting, which is a wonderful feature that is typically only seen on really high-end wax injectors. So the way that we set that up is we're going to turn our wax pots off to the side, and you'll see this little pipe sticking out here. You want to run the tubing from the vacuum onto this tubing on the side. And then in your accessory kit is this bit of tubing with a little cap on it, and you get a number of these various tips to put on there. So I'm going to install this piece of tubing on the front of the machine. And the needle is actually going to go in the back side of my mold. You can see here's the opening where we're going to be injecting. So I'm going to insert this into the mold until it's just inside the cavity where we're going to be injecting. And what that's going to do is when the mold is together, it will pull a vacuum inside of our mold while the wax is being injected. This is a great thing for especially difficult or large molds. And then I can inject like normal. So also in your accessory kit is this larger piece of tubing. This tubing is designed for injecting your own sprues. So the way you use this is we're going to put a lubricant inside. I've got some liquid Burr Life here. So I'm just going to put a little in there and kind of move it around a little bit just to get that everywhere that I need it. And then I'm going to inject this by putting it directly up to the nozzle, and I'm going to put my thumb on the back. Just like that. And then once this sets up, I'll be able to pull this sprue out and we can use it for our next cast. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and if you have any questions, always feel free to leave them in the comments.